Although both of the machines come with a wide range of decorative stitches, I almost exclusively use a straight stitch for piecing and quilting. Although recently I have branched out into some applique for a temperature quilt, and for that I have been using a blanket stitch.
Stitches, a straight stitch and the ability to drop the feed dogs and do the free motion, and that's all that Juki does. That I was just telling you about. That's all it does. Doesn't do any fancy stitches. So I've also got a very computerized sewing machine. I do just making things on. It can do buttonholes and zips and all that kind of stuff.
I would say I use probably about 20% of the stitches on my machine. I use the correct stitch for the correct job. So if I'm dressmaking and I'm working with something stretchy, I use the stretch stitches. I'll overcast. If I'm not using my overlocker, I'll use the overcasting foot and the overcasting stitches. I use the buttonhole stitches. I love a one-step buttonhole. But I also applique quite a lot. So I'll be using the blanket stitch and the satin stitch on mine, and I use that with a decorative foot, so it's got the scooping out underneath so that that slides nicely through. I also do like to use the decorative stitches on my machine because they are there, but I like to do a little bit of crazy patchwork when we stitch over the seams, just to give them a decorative look. So I would say I've probably used all of them on my machine. The machine I've got here has got 180 stitches on, and I've used most of those at one time or another, but I probably only use 10 to 12 of the stitches, anything more than regularly, and the most common one I use is my straight stitch.
There are 90 stitches, decorative stitches, quilting stitches on this machine, but I have to say I use maybe 2 or 3 on a regular basis.
So I tend to just use a running stitch, or depending on what the job is. So I just use an ordinary straight stitch, but if I'm using or working with stretch fabrics, I might use the stretch stitch. But in fact, just an ordinary basic zigzag stitch is even better than that stretch stitch, I find. So yeah, I don't use all the other stitches. Some of the other stitches I might use would be, there's just recently on the machine that I've got at the moment, they've put on a like a blanket stitch, like a little mini blanket stitch, and it's lovely. And it mix that with hand stitching, you can't really tell which is the machine stitch or what's hand stitching in your work. So I quite like that. And the other all-wow stitch that I use quite often is it's an automatic buttonhole. And I just thought, once I've got that, oh, that just opened up my life, because I could do perfect buttonholes to the size of the button, and it just works really, really well. So that's more than one stitch. That's stretch, stitch, a zigzag, a straight stitch, a buttonhole, and blanket stitch. So they're my key go-to ones that I tend to use quite a lot. I don't use any other fancy stitches. I don't think it's necessary.